Technology is my friend. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you all here again. So as I mentioned last week, because of the blip of Pesach and not wanting to skip a week of study, we divided Tazria Metzora. So we did Tazria last week and talked about the whole concept of tzara'at, the skin ailment that can also appear in clothes and it can also appear on buildings. And this week we're going to be looking at Metzora. But remember, when you come to shul, it's going to be Tazria Metzora as a double parasha. And then we'll be back in the regular sync going forward next week. So whatever it says in your calendar will be what we're doing from then on. Make sense? All right, so we're in Metzora today. And we're going to continue, of course, because these two parshiot discuss tzara'at so much, to look at tzara'at, but we're going to look at it through the very important eyes of the Chachamim, of the sages. And we touched on this a little bit last week when we talked about some of the reasons that are given for why tzara'at happens, of why people get this very unusual condition. And one of the ones we talked about was Lashon Hara, about gossip. And we're going to drill a little deeper into that topic today. With that in mind, we're going to look at page 660, which is chapter 14. And we are going to begin at verse 1. Everyone, verse 1? We're going to 414, verse 1, yeah.
Oh, verse 1. Oh.
Chapter 14, right, verse
chapter
1.
14, okay. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "This shall be the ritual for a leper at the time that he is to be purified."
Right, and remember the word leper is more rightly kept just as the word Metzora, which is the Hebrew word, because the word leper, we can actually point to real people in our world and our day that do have leprosy. And this is not the way we treat them. They are not considered ritually impure, nor do we treat them by bringing them to a Kohen. We treat them with wonderful medicine, and that's why leprosy is no longer the scourge that it once was. But for a Metzora, this is what we do.
When it has been reported to the priest shall go outside the camp. If the priest sees that the leper has been healed of his scaly affection, the priest shall order 2 live pure birds, cedar wood, crimson stuff, and hyssop, to be brought for him who is to be purified. The priest shall order one of the birds slaughtered over fresh water in an earthen vessel, and he shall take the live bird, along with the cedar wood, the crimson stuff, and hyssop, and dip them together with the live bird in the blood of the bird that was slaughtered over the fresh water. He shall then sprinkle it 7 times on him who is to be purified of the eruption, and purify him. And he shall set the live bird free in the open country.
Okay. Everyone got that? This is not the part that people normally read or have framed on the wall of their house.
Hardly, that's right.
It seem a little unusual, maybe? It's definitely one of the more unusual purification rituals. In fact, the only one that is more unusual is the burning of a red cow and using its ashes when mixed with water to purify someone who has come into contact with the deceased. That's even a little bit more perplexing. But this one with the 2 birds and the blood and the water and the sprinkling and all of that, that's up there with things that are unfamiliar and probably a little bit unsure about. We're going to come back and deconstruct this ritual. So don't worry, this is not the last we're going to talk about it. But for a moment, just be comfortable with your discomfort. Keep going.
The one to be purified shall wash his clothes, shave off all his hair, and bathe in water. Then he shall be pure. After that he may enter the camp, but he must remain outside his tent 7 days. On the 7th day he shall shave off all of his hair, of his head, his beard, his eyebrows. When he has shaved off all his hair, he shall wash his clothes and bathe his body in water. Then he shall be pure. On the 8th day, he shall take 2 male lambs without blemish, 1 ewe lamb in its first year without blemish, 3/10 of a measure of choice flour with oil mixed in for a grain offering, and 1 loaf of oil. These shall be presented before the Lord, with the man to be purified at the entrance of the tent of meeting by the priest who performs the purification.
Okay, so after we've done all of the sprinkling as the beginning of the purification process, there is washing, shaving, and then this next step of bringing additional sacrifices to the tent for the person that is going through this process. So this is quite an ordeal, quite a rigmarole that's happening, and you can see it's taking quite a bit of time as well. Yes, Michael?
In verse 8, it says, he shall be pure. And then it says again, he shall be pure in verse 9.
Mm-hmm.
Is he pure the first time, or just partially pure?
Yes, right? That these are necessary but not sufficient steps for purification. So his purification process isn't complete, but if he were to miss any of those points, then he would not become pure. So no, he doesn't immediately become pure after the first part. He only becomes pure when the entire thing has been completed.
So what does it simply say, shall be partly pure and pure?
Because there's no such thing in Jewish law as being partly pure.
Okay.
That's like being a little bit kosher.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's,
All right.
and then he will become pure means that he is on the road to ritual purification. You're right. It's not how we would write it in modern English. And that's one of the joys of reading and interpreting what is essentially a foreign 3,000-year-old book. Foreign, not because it's alien to us, but because some of the wording and the phrasing is not how we would normally talk. And we have to wrestle with that. But, what's that?
I'll be comfortable.
Be comfortable with your discomfort, yes. But thankfully we have assistance when we wrestle. So, oh, why is there, hold on. Why are there blank pages? You know, I was just saying at least the copy machine worked this time. Just one that's blank? Here.
Yeah, oh, it isn't. Yeah, it's one.
That's a double-sided there, and then there's a blank one. Okay. Well, and I got a full copy? Yes. All right, Edie, that doesn't go your way. All right, now that the wonderful copies are being sent around, some of them wonderful, some of them not. Make sure that you've got a front and back to your 2 pages, or if you've got 2 pages, make sure they're completely different. My professors in rabbinic school used to always say this was one of their intelligence tests. They'd hand out the papers, and if it made it all the way around, then everybody could stay in class. But if there was a problem simply passing papers one person to another, then we all had to go home. We weren't fit to study if we couldn't actually handle the task of moving paper around a table. All right, so from Sefer HaChinuch, which is a great summary of many of the rabbinic ideas, he is trying to look into this purification process itself and what does it mean? Not just what were the details, but why these details. So with that in mind, we're going to pick up at the top of the page.
Purification from ta'arat, where the ta'arat of a person, a garment, or a house is with cedar wood, hyssop, wool dyed red, 2 birds, and living water.
Right, mayim chayim, that's water that is taken from a living source. Okay, the same thing that we use for a mikvah.
And that he do with them everything that is written about the matter as it's stated in Leviticus.
Right, which is what we just read. Good. So that's a basic summary of the ingredients that go into the purification process. Now, why?
And 3 types of purifications are mentioned in the Torah, and these are them. Water, and this type by water includes the purification of every impurity, meaning to say it is impossible for any impure thing to emerge from impurity without water.
Right, so as one of the necessary conditions for any form of the purification rituals for any type of impurity, not only tzarat, it's going to be water. Right? This is why we use a mikvah for everything that might need to be going through a ritual purification. And that's what he's pointing out here, is that you're going to be using a mikvah eventually if something's ritually impure. Otherwise, it's not going to be ritually pure by the end. It's necessary for any ritual purification.
We do, as Jews, in Jewish religions, we do a lot of things with water, including we have to wash our hands before meals.
Yes, we do.
And so this is talking about bathing and cleaning, especially when you have something wrong with you. And actually, as we look back, that was some of the things we recommend today.
It turns out washing is a pretty good idea.
A very good idea. Yes.
Yes.
How'd they come up with it?
Well, I mean, this was not meant as part of germ theory, because the person could be, dipped in alcohol or, Purell or whatever and be pure as far as hospital sanitation go.
Yeah.
But you would still need to go through a mikvah, which could be a river, which would not necessarily be free of bacteria, germs, and other things. So it's easy to see the overlap, and it certainly had a knock-on benefit to us by having us continue to try to clean, but that wasn't its primary purpose.
No, but it was also very different from what other peoples were doing at that time as well.
Or even up until the modern world.
Until the modern world,
When
that's right.
it wasn't until you got indoor plumbing around the country that people began to bathe more regularly.
And
Yes.
Is the wool dyed red, is the red significant of blood, or is there another?
We're getting there.
Oh, sorry.
But you're asking the right questions.
And 3 types of purifications are mentioned in the Torah, and these are them. Water, and this type by water includes the purification of every impurity, meaning to say it is impossible for any impure thing to emerge from impurity, sprinkling water, and that is the type that is specific for the impurity of a dead body.
Right, so we've already got a hint here that the sprinkling of water we know from para aduma, the red heifer, the I mentioned before, where we burned the ashes and we used that to cleanse somebody who had come into contact with a dead body. So by using the sprinkling on the person who is a Metzora, who has had this condition, we are using a linkage to that dead body. And that makes a lot of sense, because when we see Moses being told about his sister Miriam and all of that, it's as though she were a dead body. It's as though you die when you have this condition. And so using something which is for restoring a body that has been in contact with a dead body makes a lot of sense. Keep going.
And the third type, the cedar wood, hyssop, wool dyed red, 2 birds, and living water. And it is a type that is specific for ta'ara.
That's unique here, right? We don't use this type of purification ritual for anything else. So that means these symbols can be unpacked precisely to deal with this particular condition.
The sages informed us of a bit of a hint in the matters of the purification of the Metzora with these things. As they, may their memory be blessed, said, that the matter is to fix in the soul of the Metzora, that if, before the illness came to him, he was haughty-hearted like the cedar, by way of metaphor, since it is a tall tree, he should lower himself like the hyssop.
All right, so let's just make sure we got that metaphor here, right? If you became afflicted with sara'at because of your arrogance, then the cedar wood being used and the hyssop that's being used are meant to contrast arrogance with humility. And you should now that you've been cured, you have moved into a place where you are more humble, and that means you should remember it. Right? This is not meant as a magical ingredient. This is meant as a multimedia lesson to the person who is going through the ritual. Right? And that's a very important distinction to make. Right? This is not a witch's brew. This is not a potions class at Hogwarts. This is, see this cedar? See this hyssop? You used to be like this, and you got to be more like this. Right? It's using the implements to try and educate the person, to stir in their soul a transformation of their character, not of the magical energies that surround them.
And some of the things I was reading about Pesach, about Passover last couple of weeks is, bread rises. Just as bread rises, we sometimes become arrogant. So for a week, we eat matzah, which does not rise, to remind us the same thing as you're just saying,
right.
Not to be so arrogant, to be more humble.
Absolutely.
Apparently, we still need those lessons.
It's almost like that's a hard lesson to learn.
So.
And it's a lesson that the better we learn it, the more prone we are to breaking it. Right? Because the more we go, wow, I'm really doing well on this humility thing. Or maybe I'm being too humble. Maybe I should strut my stuff. That's the more we work at it, often the more prone we are to having slip-ups. All right, moving on to the birds.
It is said about the reason of the birds that he did an act of chattering, meaning to say he spoke many words of evil speech. Therefore, he must sacrifice birds that constantly chirp.
Beep, 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 beep. Right? He was. I mean, we still say a chatterbox, or somebody that is twittering away or tweeting away in the modern. Right? It is that that is an overabundance of words often leads one to saying things that are best left unsaid. And the birds are meant to remind this person that they had been somebody who would tweet, and gossip and say bad things, and that needs to stop.
Isn't that out of Proverbs, where words are many, transgression is not lacking?
Yes, and we're going to get to some other proverbial quotes, literally, in just a little bit.
And with the wool dyed red, shani tola'at, I do not know or remember anything that they, may their memory be blessed, said about it.
Which is beautiful humility.
Yeah.
Right? So Sefer HaChinuch is saying, you know what? I have not read any teaching from our sages specifically of why this red stuff, which was your question. And his answer is, I don't know. But having already said that he did not receive a tradition of why the red stuff was used, he nevertheless has a hypothesis.
And it is possible that it is also a hint that he should lower himself. And it would be a hint from its name, because it's called worm, which is what tola'at means.
Exactly. So by a little play on the Hebrew words, he is saying that maybe this is also a reminder of humility, of trying to make us humble and like a worm, reminding ourselves of our lowliness in the grand scheme of things. So the red stuff does not have a formal midrash attached to it, but as you can see, our scholars don't give up just because there's nothing formal, but they also don't take credit or give credit as though this was part of the Metzora, part of the received tradition when making an innovative teaching. Okay, so as you can see from all of these symbols and from a little bit what we talked about last week, much of the blame for tzara'at in the minds of the Chachamim was about our words, was about what we said and how we said it. And so I wanted to look a little bit more closely at some of those guidelines and rules from our tradition of what it means to be careful in our words.
There is a story of a peddler who would go around to towns that were close to Tzipori. He would shout out and say, "Who wants to buy the potion of life?"
You know, he was the old, let's not call him snake oil salesman, but, you know, he's the traveling salesman, you know, step right up, see the magic elixir of life, put years on you and cure you in baldness and whatnot, right? So he would be hawking his wares.
We still have that.
Well, of course we do. We have,
on the internet, on GPD.
yes.
They would cling to him.
Yeah. Who wouldn't, right? If you got a magic potion of life, how Florida was discovered by a guy looking for the fountain of youth. I mean,
That's right.
we still want the elixir of life. I mean, they say that people in Silicon Valley are spending hundreds of millions of dollars to fund anti-aging things because all of these wonderful geniuses have figured out that the one thing they can't buy is more time. And so they're trying to see if they can prove that wrong and buy some more time. So elixirs of life, people take notice.
Rabbi Yanai was sitting and interpreting and heard him shouting out. He said, "Come down here, come down, sell to me." He said to him, "You do not need it, and those like you do not."
All right, so the seller's like, you don't need the elixir.
Yeah.
Pardon?
Yeah.
Why would a rabbi not need an elixir of life?
So he took out a book of Psalms and showed him the verse, "Who is the man who desires life?" The peddler said what's written after it, "Guard your tongue from evil, turn away from evil and do good." That's also in Psalms. Rabbi Yanai said, Shlomo also shouted out and said in Proverbs, "He who guards his mouth and his tongue guards his soul from troubles."
Right? So apparently, if you want to have a good and healthy and long life, you watch this. You watch your mouth. That is like one of the main implements. Now, since most other people can't, they also need a little bit of an extra potion. But somebody like Rabbi Yanai, who was good at watching what he was saying, he gets no benefit from the elixir because he's already getting the benefit from living that good life of good speech.
Rabbi Yanai said, "All my days I was reading this verse, and I did not know how to interpret it until this peddler came and made it understood. Therefore, Moshe warns Israel, this shall be the law for a Metzora, the law of one who gives a bad name, a Motzi Shem Ra."
Right? So Metzora, Motzi Shem Ra, right? It's an acronym for somebody who gives a bad name. So how do you get Metzora? You are somebody who gives a bad name to someone else. You are a Motzi Shem Ra. And he didn't understand that whole verse about what is it to desire life is linked to having a good control of what one says until the peddler came along. So you know what? Maybe the peddler knew something about this elixir. Maybe he was able to tell who was good and who needed to be better.
Which also means you can learn from everybody.
Absolutely
Don't think you're
right.
so smart that nobody else can teach you anything.
And what do we see as one of the main characters that character traits that Rabbi Yanai is displaying here? Humility, humbleness, right? He is not only willing to learn from the peddler, he is willing to publicly announce to everyone that he did not understand this until this guy told him, right? That is part of the essence of humility. It is not only to learn from everyone, but to make sure everyone knows you learn from everyone, and to say it proudly in the name of the person who taught you, even if that person is, in quote, beneath you in the social strata. All right, so yay for Rabbi Yanai.
Rabbi Ben Zoma, who is wise.
Who is wise? One who learns from everyone, yes. All right, now on to Proverbs, again, as a roundabout way to our topic.
In Proverbs it says, death and life are in the power of the tongue. That is, everything depends on the tongue. If one is engaged in Torah with his tongue, he is acquitted for life. Inasmuch as the Torah is called life in Proverbs, it says, wisdom is a tree of life to those who take hold of it.
Eitz Chaim He. You probably remember this from the end of every Torah service, right? That's where we draw this proverb into our liturgy constantly. So Torah is considered like life, and therefore if you fill your mouth with Torah, you are filling yourself with life, right? It's a one-to-one relationship. And he goes on to say,
it is also one's healing for the evil tongue, that is Lashon Hara, as stated in Proverbs. A healing tongue is a tree of life.
Right.
But if one is occupied with slander, his soul is condemned to death, since slander is more harmful than the shedding of blood.
what? What? If I go around like gossiping on someone or insulting people, that's worse than like shooting them? Well,
Thus, whoever kills takes only one life, but the one who speaks slander kills 3 people: the one who tells it, the one who accepts it, and the one about whom it is told.
there are more victims.
Right.
There are more victims for gossip and slander and lies and rumors than there are for a direct one-to-one killing. Because when I kill a person, I've only killed him. I'm still alive. Everyone else in the community is still alive. There's one body. But if I slander, it kills me. Because as we see, that evilness eats away at myself and my soul. It hurts the person about whom I'm slandering, and it hurts the person who listened to it. It hurts the person who accepted the rumor, who heard the story, who took that story in and was willing to give it an audience. So there are 3 victims for every act of gossip and lie and slander and rumor. Make sense? It is still, yes, in Jewish law, a higher criminal offense to murder someone than to slander someone. Don't get this wrong. It's not saying that our court is going to be filled with people who are gossiping and that they're going to receive a death sentence. But as a way of trying to motivate ourselves to avoid this horrible, horrible sin, reminding ourselves that on a spiritual level, that gossiping about someone is worse than shooting them, is a good tool for trying to reinforce and invigorate us to resist the temptation to spread those rumors, to share those ideas and lies that we know are not true or that we think aren't true, and damage others in the process, including ourselves. But we need a little more detail, which is why we're going to go to Rambam, because I've been using the terms slanderer and gossip and all of that sort of interchangeably. Jewish law actually divides these up into very discrete categories of prohibitions, so that we're aware of what it is that is prohibited, because a lot of people get this wrong. And a lot of people think that when we say in Judaism that there's Lashon Hara, and Lashon Hara means you don't gossip about other people. You shouldn't be spreading rumors and lies. It's not only rumors and lies that are the problem. Right? You can violate these commands even while saying the truth. The truth will not always set you free.
So who is a talebearer, Rachi? One who carries things and goes from one to another and says, so did X say, such and such did I hear about X. Even though it is the truth, he destroys the world.
All right, let's try and unpack that for a second. Right, so you're a talebearer. You're a Rachil. And that means that I go over to Edie and say, Edie, did you hear about Mr. Smith? Mr. Smith, I saw him with my own eyes. I saw him with my own eyes hitting his kid. Right? Horrible thing. something that Mr. Smith should rightly stop doing. Why am I telling you? What is the impact of this going to be? Right? Is this going to stop Mr. Smith? Is this going to help the kid? If Mr. Smith is hitting his kid, I can go tell the police. But by telling you, all I've done is now introduce hatred between you and Mr. Smith. Now, you may all think it's justified that you be angry at Mr. Smith. But if we simply plant the seeds of hatred and animosity or distrust among each other, even for true things, rather than actually confronting the problem itself, then the world is destroyed. The world is upheld through justice. If Mr. Smith has really done something that is deserving of punishment, then the way to make sure that happens is by talking to the authorities and directly dealing with it with the system of tzedek, of justice, that we have in Jewish law or in the United States through American law. Just telling other people the truth is not going to fix anything, but instead will only continue to poison the environment in which this is happening. And that's very hard for us to accept, because we think that as long as I'm telling the truth, I should be allowed to tell anyone. But that isn't what Jewish law says.
I had heard an example a little bit differently on the same order. Was it talking? Did you hear Yankee just got a brand new iPad? I didn't even know he could afford an iPad, but he got a brand new iPad, and he said it's fabulous. Other kids back there heard it. One of them went in Yankee's backpack, stole his iPad. Even if you're saying something good, it's still not it's still not right.
Right.
That's bad.
And not only that, it might be Yankee's his decision to share, whether he wants to share the story or not. It might be his joy to share that.
Right.
You know, I know one of the things, and hopefully my kids don't watch this, but one of the things that we've had to teach both of our kids is if there's a story that your brother or sister want to tell, you know, it's their story of what happened to them at school, even if they told you already, you know, on the ride home, when they're now telling someone else, you don't get to interrupt and repeat the story on their behalf. Not that we're pointing fingers at anyone in the room.
Not pointing any fingers.
Right? It's so-and-so's story to tell. And even if it's a good story and it's a happy story and it's a funny story and nobody's going to be offended and hurt and embarrassed or any of the other things that can happen with some stories that people like to tell, it's still not my place to share that story unless the other person has already given permission or made it clear that sharing the story is something they're happy with. And that's hard sometimes.
I remember when I was as a teenager, an example of that, disregarding whatever was said, is the individual said, if you take a bag full of feathers,
Classic story. Yeah.
Yes.
just the fact you'll never get back what you just said to that individual, the way it spreads.
Right.
You get the feathers back sooner.
And it didn't even have to be bad.
Yeah.
But it still spreads and carries on the wind. You know, just one more example, and then we'll move on to the other categories that Rambam is laying out for us. You know, I'm often privileged to have somebody come to me and say, Rabbi, I'm going to, you know, propose to so-and-so. Or they'll come to me after and say, Rabbi, we want to get married and we need to set a date and da-da-da-da-da. And so we'll sit down and we'll talk about that. Until they tell other people, I don't get to announce their engagement or their wedding or, oh, did you hear so-and-so is going to propose to so-and-so? I don't get to have that conversation. After I can say, yes, I heard they're going to get married and it's wonderful and I'll be doing the ceremony and it's such a simcha and all of that good stuff. You have to learn not to share even the good news if it's not appropriate. And there are plenty of times where it is appropriate. Once something becomes widely known, you know, everyone saw the post on Facebook that said that the baby was born, then absolutely you can say, did you hear so-and-so had a baby? Because I saw on Facebook that they posted that they had a baby. But you have to be careful how you're doing it and also honest in your own motivation of why it is that you're sharing something to make sure that it is for the right reasons. Onward.
So with the gossip, even though it's the truth, he destroys the world.
Right.
There is a much greater sin than this, and it is included in this negative commandment, and that is evil speech, lashon hara. And that is the one who speaks disparagingly about his fellow, even though it's true.
Okay, so we'll pause there. Right, so lashon hara is to speak badly of a person, even when it's accurate. Right, you might be massaging the presentation of something, but it's technically true. but you're doing it in a way that is disparaging for a person. So you might say, did you see that that such and such didn't even buy new pants for their son when he went back to school? I mean, why would somebody, with what he makes as a doctor, why wouldn't they buy new pants? It's a shame that their son goes to school with tattered clothes. Well, technically it's true that the kid wasn't wearing new pants. And that is not a lie, but the way you are phrasing it is
Gossip.
It's gossip. And it's worse than gossip. It's lashon hara. It's an evil tongue, right? It's a tongue of wickedness, because you are lashing this person, you are hurting this person's reputation by sharing the truth in such a deliberately negative way. Sharing the positive truth in a positive way is still something that we have to be careful about, but sharing negative truth in a negative way is absolutely prohibited, and it is a much worse violation. And yet those are usually the juiciest bits. Right? I saw so-and-so and such, and they were at a cafe, and boy, did she get into a fight with him over something, and I was there, and it sounds like their relationship, their wedding, I bet you're going to get divorced. Is it true they were arguing in the cafe? Yes. Is it true that it was in a public setting, so this is not like a secret, you weren't listening at the door, but it was right there? Yes. Does that mean you should go and tell your friend what you heard? No. No. Definitely not. Is that hard to resist?
Definitely.
Definitely. Definitely. I mean, how many of our minutes in the checkout line at the supermarket are spent staring at all of the covers, and I'm sure some will admit, not here, you don't have to the guilty pleasure of buying the rags that are there that tell you all about your favorite stars and celebrities and various other famous people and their goings-on. And 80% or more of what's in those is lashon hara. It is absolutely possibly true, although it may be more in the next category. But even if it is true, it is almost always said in a disparaging way. We saw a picture of so-and-so with such and such, and they're not even, and he's not even divorced yet. Do I need to know this? Is it your place to tell me this, even if it's true? I mean, yes, it's not laudable. It's not a good character quality, but this is not news, and this is not something that should be spread in this way. So resist the urge to buy them. Onward.
But one who speaks falsely is called the producer of a bad reputation, motzi shem ra, I guess we should like Metzora, about his fellow.
Right, so that is even worse, right? If you are the motzi shem ra, you are creating the bad reputation for this person because you're lying, right? So there is telling the truth in a way that isn't intended to harm, but you're still carrying those rumors and information about the person, and that's prohibited. That's the rachilut, the gossip level. And then there's lashon hara, which is insulting gossip, where it's still true, but it's definitely being done in a negative and hurtful way. And then there's motzi shem ra, where you take falsehood and you use it to damage another person's reputation. And there's no way for us to believe their reputation would have been damaged were it not for the lie. Right? When you make up, I saw so-and-so with Miss so-and-so in the cafe, and you didn't see them in the cafe, that is motzi shem ra, and that is an even higher level of forbidden speech to be engaged in, of destruction that comes out of our mouths.
But about this master of evil speech who sits and says, X did so-and-so and his ancestors, and so did I hear about him, and says disparaging things about this one, the verse states, may the Lord cut off all flattering lips, every tongue that speaks arrogance. But
then what are we going to talk about?
That's right.
If we're not going to talk about other people, what are we going to talk about? And I have to rely on the normal means of actually fixing problems if there's some difficulty, or if I see somebody, if I witness a wrong action, then what am I going to do? You're going to create a world of Torah that actually guards against all of these types of problems, because this is a poison that seeps into the world. And it is such a seductive poison. It is something that we lend ourselves, give ourselves over to so easily. As the next two texts are going to remind us.
It is the same whether one speaks evil speech in front of his fellow or not in front of him.
Meaning the victim. right? It's some people think, well, I was only talking to so and so. I would never say this in front of him. Right? I wouldn't call him a liar and a cheat and a business, and a duplicitous businessman to his face. But I think other people have a right to know, right? No, it's the same. If you wouldn't say it to his face, you shouldn't say it behind his back. Full stop. And if you would say it to his face because he did cheat you in a business deal and you need to have redress because of the dishonesty this person has displayed, by all means, say, I believe that you acted falsely in this last business dealing and I need you to fix it. And if the person says no, you go to court. You don't go to the cafe and then begin telling everyone else.
And one who recounts things that, if they will be heard, cause damage to his fellow, to his body, or to his property, or even will upset or frighten him, behold, this is evil speech. And if it is said in front of 3, the matter is already heard and known.
So this is one of the basic reasons why when we have a beit din for public ceremonies and such, we need 3, because if you say it in front of 3, it's public knowledge. Right? There are no secrets among 3, and you can't ever say, well, I told it to my friends, but I told them in confidence that it would be a secret, and they weren't supposed to tell anybody else. Yeah, well, neither were you.
It's the same reason you cannot have attorney-client privilege if there's a third person present.
Is that true?
Yes,
I didn't know that legally.
Code of professional responsibility. Established it. So
that makes a lot of sense.
My bar example.
Yeah.
Have the third person anywhere present. It's no longer.
As soon as you have that third person, then you can't say this was privileged information because
everybody knows.
That's
Everybody knows.
exactly. Well,
it's here.
Jewish law is a little higher, right? If you got 3 people that are listening, then it's definitely public knowledge. But of course, the standard is you shouldn't be saying even to one person. This doesn't mean you gossip with just one person at a time as your workaround for this. It just means that you should even be more careful when speaking to anything like the beginning of a group. What's that?
It's the old joke. 3 people can keep a secret if 2 of them are dead.
Precisely.
Yes, that's pretty much it. Even one person has trouble keeping a secret, but yeah, once you spread it, it's going to leak everywhere. Which is why Chofetz Chaim, who wrote an entire book about Lashon Hara, one that I highly recommend that you read. There are good translations readily available. In his introduction, he says a lot of very powerful things, but I ran out of space. But this is, I thought, something that added a unique take to our other texts.
A receiver of Lashon Hara is one who believes in his heart what is told him by his friend, even if he doesn't abet him in the telling, but only believes in his heart the Lashon Hara and Rechilut that he has heard. If he does believe it, he is called the bearer of a false report and transgresses the commandment that says, do not bear a false report.
Okay, so he's putting a very important spin on this, which most of us think when we read that phrase, don't bear a false report, right? Don't engage in rechilut. That means I should not go around spreading gossip. And clearly that is prohibited. But what Chofetz Chaim is saying is that if you are a willing receiver of gossip, you have already transgressed. You don't have to be the continuing transmitter of the gossip to violate this. You only have to sit there while someone else tells you the juicy bit of gossip and you didn't say, stop. And you didn't say, no, I don't think that we should be talking about them. Or I don't think that's appropriate to share. Or I'm sure they wouldn't want that to be public knowledge. Or isn't that just a private matter? Or isn't that just between them? If you don't stop, but you, oh, wow, and you take it in, you are already now bearing that tale. You are already now engaged in rechilut. It's like the old saying that if there was no place to sell stolen goods, every thief would be honest. Right? If there was no one willing to listen to gossip, no one would actually share it. And it may be true that the primary drivers, the main sharers of gossip in most communities and social circles, usually there's just a handful of the people that are the real movers and shakers of the internal news network, the ones who are always on the phone or are always texting or are always posting on Facebook and really sharing everything. But other people are listening. And if they didn't listen, the big sharers wouldn't bother sharing. And we need to see that being willing to listen and entertain this type of gossip is perpetuating the problem. It is contributing to the problem, and it is a violation of the mitzvah, of the commandment. That's hard, because we don't like thinking that being passive is somehow an active violation, but we are. All right, which is why, Arifin, from the Talmud, we get this wonderful little reminder about how we were even made to keep this in mind.
The Holy One, blessed be He, said to the tongue, all the limbs of man are erect.
Right, they are up and they are ready and moving about to do things. Like, my arm, it's boom, right? Maybe not so much boom, but it's more than the torso at least.
But you, tongue, you are horizontal.
Right?
They,
The whole tongue's not up and perky and ready to go. The tongue's just lying there. Just sits there flat in your mouth.
they are all outside the body, but you are inside. More than that, I have surrounded you with two walls, one of bone and the other of flesh.
Right? It's true. We have two walls. We have the teeth and we have the lips. There are two layers that our tongue has to go through before what we say reaches the outside world. It has to first be made to stand up and get moving. It then has to be made to go outside for the voice to exit our body. And to do that, we have to pry open two barriers that were put in the way between our teeth and our lips before what we say is going to go. And that is God's attempt to give us a safety margin. Right? God tried to lock this down because he knew that how much damage we can do with this thing. That compared to our hand, this is much more deadly than anything that we can possibly do with our hand. But we sometimes forget that the mouth was designed to keep the tongue in, and we think the mouth was designed just so that I could spread everything I want out there. But it had sort of an out valve rather than a lock.
The tongue is almost the mightiest of our limbs, for with it we can move armies.
Absolutely. It's the only thing that ever has.
And we can bless those that are made in God's image, and with it we curse those that are made in God's image.
It is the most deadly implement we have.
Yeah.
Right? Because Judaism does not believe that the thoughts of our mind are actual evil actions. They have to be translated into action for them to do wrong, right? So you may think in your heart, oh, that guy is such a scoundrel, blah, 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 blah. But if you don't act on it, you have not violated a commandment. You should still work to erase that kind of hate and anger from you, but you haven't actually tripped the wire of the booby trap of the commandments until you actually move against that person. And one of the primary ways we move against a person is through speech.
I always tell people, words are deeds. They are what you do with your mouth. I didn't do anything. Well,
we were just talking.
We were just talking. No, words are deeds.
Just saying, exactly.
What about writing? Like you mentioned before, the newspapers that put out things, is that also?
Oh, absolutely. So spreading gossip or lashon hara or motzi shem ra through written works is just as bad as doing it verbally. Absolutely. So if someone like those wonderful magazines at the checkout line, right? If they're saying, so and so are getting divorced, or such and such is pregnant, or such and such has a drug addiction, when there's no such truth at all, and not even any shred of reason to believe that's true, other than it will sell more magazines, then they are absolutely violating these commandments with those kinds of lies and rumors.
But even if it is true.
Even if it is true, it's a different level of violation, but it's still a violation.
Right,
Yeah,
it is.
because
You're seeking embarrassment.
Right.
just because somebody's a movie star, I should be told when they have a drug addiction.
Mhm.
What right do I have to know that they have a drug addiction just because I've watched a movie about them? I mean, I don't own their life because I bought a ticket to the theater. And they should be allowed to have a private life. And when people say, well, if you choose to be a celebrity, you'd give up all right to privacy. No, you don't. No, you don't. The person should be subject to the same rules of privacy as the rest of us. It may be a little harder if they're constantly walking down the red carpet and are stopping and giving interviews. That's their choice. But whatever they choose to keep private in their house, when they have the door shut and the drapes drawn, people should not be climbing over the walls and going through their trash and all those other sorts of things. They do not cede the right to privacy just because they happen to work in a very public medium, any more than athletes would be worthy of that kind of vigorous examination, or public teachers or things like that. It's no, you may have a public facing job, but you're still allowed to have a private life, and gossiping about that person is just as bad as gossiping about your neighbor or your cousin.
David and I lived in Hollywood for a while, and what you're saying is a very nice theory. Those celebrities have no private life at all.
I know.
The photographers are standing outside their home right across the street all day with cameras poised, just waiting for the blind to go up so they can take pictures. When they walk in the street.
But why are they taking the pictures?
So that they can then publish it, because it'll be a picture of something that's true.
And they're going to sell it to who?
You're right. If they didn't sell it, they wouldn't do it.
Right. We're the fence, right? We're buying the stolen privacy from these people.
That's right. We are doing it.
Right. When we buy those things, when we watched entertainment TV, not soap opera, but the gossipy TV shows about celebrities that are all over the place, we are funding the people who go out on the front line of invasion of privacy.
But it's so interesting when you see the picture of one of those beautiful, glamorous movie stars. Oh, she's walking down the street and she hasn't put on her makeup yet, and she really looks kind of bad from the back, and they take a picture.
And she's picking up after her dog.
Yeah.
I mean,
and they put that in the paper. I mean, everybody, you just almost can't help but look.
as if what we need to be reminded that celebrities are human beings, that they don't look in real life like they look on TV.
But it's sort of a failing inside us too for
Of
looking
course.
as well.
It's that attitude is very corrosive.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, guard your tongue.
Yes.
We title this week's lesson, Bite Your Tongue.
But you're telling me.
We shouldn't have to bite it, but we should learn how to hold it.
Hold it.
Yes. As we've touched on, the tongue can do some amazing things. So it doesn't need to be bit, it just needs to be controlled.